So people who are on the forefront of the sustainability visioning for the future are trying to find the intersection between environmental restoration and addressing extreme poverty issues. I mean, there are 2 billion people worldwide who live on less than $2 a day, and all these people deserve to have their basic needs met. Given, I mean, I hate to talk about limits, but there is a limited amount of, there are limited amounts of non-renewable natural resources, or even renewable natural resources. We can't use them faster than they can recharge. So how do we make sure that we can meet everybody's needs with just this one planet that we do have?
Well, part of the challenge, I mean, I think the idea that we're running out of resources is an old one. It goes back to the 70s, and there's certainly some resources that we're running out of. Like, I think we've overfished the oceans, so 90% of the big fish that we eat are now gone. So that is definitely happening. There's no more salmon in California, or up from California to Oregon, which is a major tragedy, really. But there's other things like coal, which there's a lot of. And despite, yes, we're probably running out of oil, but we're not going to run out of oil anytime soon. It's going to take a while to use up all that oil, and we actually keep discovering new reserves. So one of the challenges is, in fact, that we're not running out of fossil fuels. If we were, that might make this the challenge of dealing with climate change a little bit easier. So where the rubber hits the road is just that fossil fuels, one of our senior fellows at Breakthrough Institute calls fossil fuels sort of an affirmative action program for humans. There's so much energy in a small amount of coal compared to wood or dung, which is what the global poor use for energy. And there's so much more energy in a little rock of coal than in a lot of solar panels, which are much more expensive to make than to dig up this rock of coal. So really, once you understand it that way, and you understand that countries like China and India are not going to sacrifice their development in the name of climate change, then it really is incumbent on us, those nations that are pretty darn wealthy already, to invent new sources of energy that are clean and also as cheap as possible, as quickly as possible.
It just seems like there's an opportunity to connect the dots, but you don't quite connect the dots. You don't come out and say it. If developed nations were less wasteful with some of the resources we use, those resources could help alleviate extreme poverty. Mm-hmm. How wasteful we are with fossil fuels, with potable water, with different resources. Are you hesitant to connect the dots there because of the message it sends to Americans?
I think that obviously there's huge gains that can be made. We can become more efficient in our use of all kinds of resources, whether it's water or energy. There's a whole set of barriers in the way of making efficiency happen. I think the big picture that I understand is that the U.S. has actually become a lot more efficient in its use of energy. We create more wealth using less energy now than we did 30 years ago. Now, part of that's because we're no longer a big manufacturing nation like we were 30 years ago. So manufacturing requires more energy. We've become much more of a service and knowledge economy. So that's a big part of the reason. We do support efforts to become more efficient in the use of our resources, but it's important to remember that we can become a lot more efficient in the United States, and the world is still going to need to triple the amount of energy that it consumes and produces. So you're never going to be able to become efficient enough to take away from the need to have energy sources that just don't pollute. And so we feel like the message that we grew up on as environmental activists that we hear a lot has been that, well, we can just kind of limit our way out of this challenge. We can use resources more efficiently. We can conserve more. And there's a role to be played by those things, but we really need new sources of energy that are cleaner and cheap. And we feel like that hasn't really, not enough attention has been paid to that. And as a consequence, countries like China and India are quite understandably relying on the same fossil fuel sources for their energy that we've relied on for our development.